Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. Steve, welcome back.
Thank you.
Really excited to kind of dig back into the history of how you got here. Not so much how you got to Serenbe, but people ask me all the time, what's Steve's history and how does a hospitality guy end up here doing placemaking and developing a community?
Down memory lane.
I know. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, which we've mentioned before, is a little bit about your time at Stouffer's. And we again think about Stouffer's as Stouffer's Foods, and I almost want to say that at the end of Stouffer's, but it was really a hotel group, correct?
Well, actually, it started as a restaurant group.
Okay.
This was in the, 20s, 30s, I guess, that Vernon Stouffer and his brother started a restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio. It's been a while since I've remembered the history of that. And they progressed, and interestingly, Vern Stouffer and Mr. Marriott of Marriott Hotels were great friends back in those days. And so they shared a lot of stories and challenges and what have you. But Stouffer's was really the restaurant giant, and then got into frozen foods and then hotels. I started working for them in college as a busboy, and then ended up going into management and then their team of opening hotels.
And I think that we've talked about, but I love the story, maybe you can repeat it for me, of how you went from bussing tables in one summer to basically being the maitre d'.
Well, that was my first summer off the farm. So, of course, I had grown up as a child of generational farmers in Boulder County, Colorado. And I was determined I was not returning to the farm nor going to be a farmer. And so my break between from University of Colorado, friends had said, come on up to their resort in Granby, Colorado. And there were lots of jobs because this is a big summer resort and lakes and hiking and all that. And so I arrived, and they apologized that they had no idea how many returning kids came, and there were very few jobs, but they had gotten me a job as a dishwasher, but clarified it was in the finest resort in town. Well, I didn't care what I did as long as I wasn't working back on the farm. And so I gladly accepted dishwashing. And the third night, the owner came back and asked if any of us had brought suits with us for the summer. And I have no idea, other than my mother told me to always be prepared, but I was the only person who raised their hand. And so he said, go put the suit on, you're the maitre d', because I just fired the maitre d', so you're going to be the maitre d' for the next couple nights. Well, I ended up being the maitre d' for the whole summer, and I had decided I had arrived in paradise. All of the waitresses, of course, were over 21 to serve liquor, and suddenly I was the most wonderful thing they had seen, because I, of course, was responsible for the early seating and the late seating. So they got me a fake ID, took me out drinking, and I decided this was really a lot more interesting than architecture, where I was starting out. But then I returned to school and needed money for Christmas, and decided that I was really an experienced restaurateur, and I could get a job in one of these nice restaurants in Denver that was looking for people. And after 2 weeks of humbly coming back and realizing that, no, I was just an 18-year-old kid, and I accepted a job as a busboy with Stouffer's, who was opening the Top of the Rockies in Denver.
Okay.
And it was brand new, and they were just opening it. It was great. I enjoyed the whole camaraderie with the restaurant folks. There were a lot of college students also working there from University of Denver and University of Colorado, and so it just naturally fell in. And so I continued working, and then became an assistant manager, and they put me through the paces of running a kitchen. That's where I really learned my controls and what have you. And they were really starting to expand their hotel division, and so asked me if I wanted to go to St. Louis, and I was the assistant sales manager in St. Louis.
And at this point, just to stop you for 1 second, you had left school. That you went for the Christmas, you went to go for work and never went back?
Well, I returned working, supposedly a full-time student, but I was working more and more. And then in those days, Stouffer's only, you had to have a college degree to go into management.
Okay.
And that's what I was working to. And, like so many times, you're short of managers. And so they asked me if I would take a break and they would help me pay my education. But they had a closing manager's position for the restaurant. And so I took that break in junior year and never returned.
Okay.
Because I was this bright-eyed, young, blonde, energetic person that I just saw things logically and I related to people. And so I went to the opening team in St. Louis, and they decided to sign the deal for the Atlanta hotel. They moved me to Atlanta before we'd even broken ground to set up all the arrangements for the groundbreaking.
Wow.
And I was into that a few months, and I got a call one day to come to Cleveland, and I packed a bag for 2 days and go to Cleveland, and I was offered national director of marketing for 13 hotels.
And you were what, all of 20?
I was 24.
Wow.
And so I thought the world was an oyster. And so this was an incredible opportunity. Most people reporting to me were in their 40s and 50s. It was just the right place at the right time. But it was a unique time to be at Stouffer's because they had a big headquarters in Cleveland, Ohio, with the many divisions. And my office that happened to be available was 2 doors down from Vernon Stouffer.
Okay.
And in his senior years. And we were the 2 first people in every morning. So at the coffee machine, I got to know him and chat with him. And I was there at a unique time when he sold the company to Litton Industries. And the struggle in that inheritance and who does he leave it to? He had 3 children, and a whole story there in interesting. But then in my period of time, I was 2 years that I decided to come back to Atlanta, and I'll come back to that. But Vernon's son-in-law was with Nestle Chocolate and managed to buy the family company back through Nestle to the son-in-law that he didn't leave it. Didn't feel he could leave to just the son-in-law when he had a son and daughter, and brought it back. So I watched a lot of lifetime employees that were with the company, and here I was in my 20s, and I saw these people in their 60s and 70s who were putting into early retirement through the big corporations of Litton and Nestle's. And so that was a real eye-opener as I was looking at what my future was going to be. I'd fallen in love with Atlanta in the time I'd spent here. And then because this was a hotel we were developing, I was here probably every month. And so watching what was happening, I made the decision I was moving back to Atlanta and that I was going to take myself off the corporate treadmill.
And this was 19...
And so this would have been in 1972.
Okay.
And I was 26 years old. And I said that I was either going to quit or we were making a change in Atlanta. And I suggested that I take that position and acknowledge that I was taking myself off the corporate treadmill, but I might stay there forever. I didn't have any plans other than I wanted to go to Atlanta. And I wasn't going to be moving.
And were you then going to run the whole?
No, I came back to head up the marketing effort.
Head up the marketing. Okay, great.
And so I came as part of the marketing team. So I came back in January of 72. We opened the hotel in October. Part of the team that had opened St. Louis with me came to open the Atlanta hotel. The food and beverage director, the catering director, and various other people. It was kind of the opening team. So here are all my buddies coming back. We were all back together in Atlanta. Fun, yeah, and it was great fun.
And this was called the Stouffer.
It was the Stouffer's Hotel.
Stouffer's Hotel, and they had a restaurant called 590 West.
That's right. And 590 West was on top of the hotel.
So that was their equivalent of the top of the Sixes, or
that is correct.
Okay.
Now, but however, Atlanta already had Top of the Mart, which was on top of the merchandise mart that had been opened here.
Oh, interesting.
Probably in the 60s.
Okay, that's great. That's really interesting. And so, tell me a little bit about the hotel. You've got all your friends back from St. Louis. You're opening the hotel. What interesting things were you able to do at this hotel? Or tell me a little bit about what was different about it.
Well, 1972, Atlanta was just emerging as the capital of the South.
Mm-hmm.
This was coming out of the big campaign of Atlanta Too Busy to Hate.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of things happening, a lot of young people. It was really energetic, but it was still a little over 1 million people. It was not a big town.
Mm-hmm.
This was, Atlanta had premiered the Hyatt Hotel, which was the beginning of the big open atriums. So there was a lot of hotel focus. Mm-hmm. Marriott had one of their first prototype, their major convention hotel was here.
Okay.
And Stouffer's was coming in with a smaller, those were all in the 800-900 rooms. We came in with a 500 room hotel that was not in the center city, but just in Midtown, because it was on North Avenue, a few blocks from Koch's headquarters. So there was a whole thought that corner there of Peachtree and West Peachtree and North Avenue would become a mini center that never actually emerged. It was Life of George's headquarters. The insurance company was there, and the hotel was next to that. It was designed by Heery and Heery, big architects in Atlanta of the day. And the unique feature was 4 suites, each with their individual dipping pool. And so then we had, of course, the main pool for the hotel, which was up on the 4th floor above the lobby. You really didn't see that from the street, but it sat up as the hotel jotted back. And so as we thought about the campaign, we really wanted to make these suites the big deal with their own pool. And so we built our whole opening campaign around the big splash. And to create that big splash, literally, we brought in the cliff divers from Acapulco, and they dove off the 22-story building into that pool. So
that's crazy.
This was quite a logistics that you had to know the depth of the pool and that they could actually do that. And we all still held our breath, and the wind couldn't be any more than a certain degree, and we'd had this whole big out. So it was great fun. All of our literature, everything was the big splash to really bring focus that we were unique in having hotel suites.
I love it. I love it.
That whole image.
So you open the hotel in October. Everything's going great.
So we opened the hotel in October, and of course these are all my buddies, and so we're 20, we're working hard, partying hard. And one night in Savannah, 4 of us were in Savannah and drinking way too much and decided we should all just quit our jobs and open a restaurant. We'd seen this restaurant that was for sale. And
in Savannah.
In Savannah. And so we came back to Atlanta, but somehow that stuck in my mind as, why not? Now, this is just after we've opened the hotel. And I went back to Savannah the next weekend to negotiate the purchase of the restaurant, which didn't turn out. So I came back sort of, disappointed, but thought, well, why Savannah? Wouldn't Atlanta be a better place? Who wants to leave Atlanta? And so I proceeded to do my legwork, and I found this closed restaurant just a few blocks from the hotel. Midtown in the 70s was a pretty sad place. It had basically been vacated because the hippies had taken over in the late 60s, and when they left, there was just empty storefronts. And so this was a building that had been built in 1900 and was Vic's Delicatessen for years.
Oh, wow.
And then it had gone through bad times once that closed, and in the previous 5 years, it had been 5 different restaurants. It was awful. But I could buy all the equipment and the lease and everything for $10,000.
Wow.
And the rent was only $400 a month.
Okay.
And so I could afford that. And so I talked my friends into we should all quit our jobs. And so in one session, we all went into our general manager.
Oh, no.
And it was the food and beverage manager, the banquet manager, and I was the head marketing manager. And we all said we were leaving.
Oh, no.
It was great. He smiled. I mean, he was thrilled for us. And he said, if I didn't have 3 kids, I would join you. So it was,
you're following your dream.
We had the full support of all the management. And then the 4th person who was a friend was Dick was in the personnel for Neiman Marcus, which had just opened in Atlanta. And he had been drinking with us in Savannah. So he was in on this deal.
He joined in.
And so it was one of those carefree moments that looking back, what were we even thinking of? But we were in the moment, and I talked the local bank that I'd worked with the in the hotel to loan us $25,000.
Wow.
And we put a keg of beer in the middle of the building, and we started stripping the plaster off the walls to find those brick walls. The drop-in ceiling revealed this old tin ceiling that was kind of scarred up, but what the heck. And then that awful greasy carpet that was down, we started scraping that up, and there was that old octagon tile. Oh. And so it was just like Christmas, as we didn't have to add to, we just took everything away. And here was this wonderful, like, New York neighborhood restaurant that emerged, which fit this very casual design. Now, 1972, Atlanta had private clubs.
Okay.
Very fancy reservation restaurants. And it was the emergence, the beginning of what we called the Fern bars, but this is the beginning of TGI Fridays. So these were bars that were serving food. And that was kind of a new thing that was happening.
Right.
But here we came in with this restaurant with fresh linen, flowers, no reservations, reasonable prices, fun young servers. And it was just a fresh, new look in the dining scene of Atlanta.
Well, and that's what I've, having grown up in California, and grew up in the 70s. I was too young to be going to restaurants at that point, but, I was born in 70, but it was the same thing. There were clubs, there were really fancy tablecloth, and there really wasn't anything in between. There was like Marie Callender's we would go to, right? I don't know if that's something out in the South. But what were some of the things that you did differently?
Well, to play on what you just said, I remember the National Restaurant Association at the big convention, they were talking about the emergence of new casual restaurants. And from California, it was Spago's.
Oh, yeah.
And Richard Melvin out of Chicago.
Okay.
And I represented the Southeast. And I forget who. There was someone from the Northeast. And so they had us from 4 different regions talking about the emergence of a new dining style.
Oh, that's great.
And so it's how far we've come from the 70s. So we had fresh food. We had to drive a truck to Florida to get fresh seafood. It shows you where we are.
That sounds wild, right?
So it was a struggle to actually bring fresh food in. We did a lot of what you would think of your more Parisian recipes, but with an American flair. So coq au vin, steak au poivre, scallops Parisienne, and some of those things. But people still remember our bread, which was sliced rolls dipped in garlic parmesan and
sounds
toasted.
great.
And you could smell them when you walked in. We created this incredible dressing on the salads with a bit of an anchovy, and it just was a unique flavor that people would rave for. And then our desserts, I think that we always like to be a little bit decadent, but how could we do this in a new flair? And here again, we were using some traditional. So baked Alaskas at that point were hot in all your fancy restaurants, and they would roll them out for 2 and they would flame them at the table. And so we decided to do our own version. So we took a clay flower pot and we put the sponge cake and the ice cream and the creme de menthe all in there. And then we had meringues that formed the top as though earth, and we browned them and put a straw in it and a live daisy. And so we called it our flower pot. And so that was our version of the baked Alaska.
Oh, that's so great.
And that became a real iconic image. But through the years, we were some of the first to put candy and cookie and cheesecakes, and you look at all that whole emergence with the Cheesecake Factory. We were the beginning of that trend.
Interesting.
And a lot of things of having fun with food, but yet it had high quality and freshness.
Well, one of the other things that, because people will stop you on the street still to this day, and they remember the restaurant. And I mean, you obviously built it up to, over 30, but that was the place to go for birthdays and anniversaries and graduation. But the thing that I thought that was interesting is that you guys used chalkboards for the menus. Is that correct?
We did. It was, we were out of money and we were ready to open, and no one had thought about printing a menu. And so it was kind of like, well, what can we do? Well, let's just write it on a chalkboard.
Great.
And then it was 5 items. And so we'd bring the chalkboard and discuss each of the items. And that was fairly unique.
That was very unique. Yeah.
At the time. So we did a lot of things that were, not normal at the time.
Servers' first names, that was another thing.
All of our servers would introduce themselves.
And that was like shocking, right? To have that kind of relationship with your server.
That's right.
Right. That's so fun. So now it gets off the ground. I'm sure there were highs and lows and that kind of stuff. But, you did grow it to over 35 or 33, 35?
36 restaurants.
Okay. So what was the sort of next step after that first one?
Here it was really exciting, but here we had 4 executives doing menial. We did everything. We had a dishwasher, but we scrubbed the floors. We did everything. And it was difficult for some.
Of course.
And so the food and beverage director, who had been a high profile person, it hit her on some emotional things, and she tried committing suicide. And we did not realize the triggers it had caused.
Right.
And so that next morning she said, I can't stay here. And she left, and she said, just pay me whatever you want to. Well, at that point it was a bank debt. There was no, we were 3 months into this restaurant.
Right.
And so we were drawing up those papers, and the catering manager, who was a fabulous cook, and so she was running the kitchen, and we were getting busier and busier and hiring staff, but she would come in earlier and stay later, and you could see she was losing weight and wearing herself out.
Right.
At that point, when I stopped waiting tables and swung into the kitchen because I was worried, and she went into the hospital with mono and was in for 10 days, and she had really run herself right down to the core.
Sure.
And so she then, when we had the papers to sign for the other partner, she said, just duplicate them. She says, I can't do this.
No.
And so they both left, but we didn't know where it was going. I mean, we assumed the debt and paid them, I forget, it was very minimal, a couple $1,000s, but they were just happy to be out from under the debt, and we got the bank to take their names off of it. So it was still questionable. We weren't, we were starting to get busy, but it wasn't a assured thing.
Sure.
And by month 6, we had lines out the door.
Wow, that's exciting.
And at that point, we opened the doors at 5 o'clock, and people would be lined to get the seats. We only had 62 seats.
Okay.
And it was you were coming to the wrong part of town in those days.
Yep.
This incredible food, and the parking lot was full of very fancy cars.
Right.
And so it became more of it was the thing. It was the thing. If you had not been to the Pleasant Peasant, you just were not in.
Right. And this was across the street from what is now Emory Crawford Long.
That's correct.
So, I mean,
and there was the Crawford Long Hospital was
still there.
But not this new, it was the older hospital.
Yep.
And that was there. So that's why people knew. All you had to do is say you're across from Crawford Long.
Right.
And on Peachtree Street. So that's what we realized. If people could identify where you were, no matter how bad the town was, they knew how to get there.
Right.
And so, and Atlanta was emerging. The Omni had just opened. And so you started having entertainment stars that had not been to Atlanta. And we were the place. So every week we had someone famous whatever was happening in Atlanta, we were the place to come.
To go.
And we were known as really drawing all these incredible people. And one of our regular customers was the general manager of Phipps Plaza.
Okay.
Phipps Plaza at that point was 5 years old. They had brought Saks and Lord & Taylor and Tiffany's all to town. And this was a big deal for Atlanta. But it seems Atlanta wasn't ready to really support these big New York stores.
Interesting.
And in the 5th year, the second level, which had a restaurant in it and several shops, was basically all shuttered.
Oh, no.
Hair salon and Merrill Lynch were the only things open on the second floor.
Oh, no.
And so the general manager had been enamored with what we were doing and the crowds we were bringing, and made us an incredible deal to take over the closed restaurant there. And so I decided it was such an incredible deal and they were going to totally redo the restaurant to our specifications. And that I was fine if we just did lunch, because the mall was closed 5 nights a week. So how was I going to get people through a closed mall to a restaurant? Stan Topol was teaching school at that time, had never designed a professional restaurant, had done a few houses.
Oh, my gosh.
And we asked Stan if he would take on totally redoing the space, which we call the Peasant Uptown.
Okay.
Of course, that launched Stan's design career. With our first lunch, we had 400 people. It was amazed. We opened it for dinner 6 weeks later with lines again. And within 6 months, every vacant space on the second floor was leased.
Wow.
And so as word got out about the draw that we had and that a restaurant could have, as I look back, this was the beginning of placemaking. And this was in a period of time, this is 1974. Retail really wasn't using hospitality as a draw. We were at the beginning of that trend. But that paved the way for deals that I was able to make then to build our restaurant career. And so we either bought properties at very depressed values, or the developer or owner of the building made us incredible deals because we were a destination.
Right, which is still happening. That still happens today with restaurants. They use that as an anchor and a draw.
Right.
And so I know that, so that was the second one. Are there other ones in Atlanta that sort of stick out in your mind that were sort of interesting? Or
we were really pivotal in a lot of the development that you look back has happened. So we were the first liquor license in Roswell and in the old town square when it was boarded up as well. And Dick Myrick brought us in and actually was able to extend his lease on the area, and he gives us credit for having saved that real estate for him. In Decatur, we were the first table service restaurant there, but then I realized that we needed to do more than just help the landlord where I could. So there we bought the building at depressed prices and created the restaurant there on the old town squares in Decatur. That was a mixed restaurant that we put there. That was the beginning of our casual concept mix. Daly's in downtown Atlanta was the first restaurant outside a hotel in 30 years. We took over then the old Federal Reserve building in the Hurt building, and that was Atlanta's finest dining room in downtown Atlanta.
Well, what was that called?
And that was called City Grill.
City Grill.
Stanley Marcus of Neiman Marcus loved our concept, and he wanted us to go to Dallas, and I wasn't interested. And he said, okay, what city that Neiman's is in do you want to go to? And I said, well, we're interested in Washington, D.C. And he called me 2 weeks later and said, good, I've negotiated your lease at the Mazda where Neiman's was. And he understood the lease we needed, and he had. And so we opened our first out of Georgia restaurant in D.C.
And was that also that? So that was Mazda was an indoor mall.
That was an indoor mall, and we had a key corner. It was a 2-story restaurant there.
2-story restaurant. Wow.
And, it was.
How many seats was it?
With an elevator. Oh, we were
an elevator.
250. You know, it was quite a. It was quite a restaurant. We were. It was a real anchor for this rather exclusive mall in DC, and then we had a presence in DC, and so when the Pennsylvania Development Authority were in the midst of redoing Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House to the Capitol, which was also a really depressed, awful area in the 60s. They talked to a number of restaurants to come in because they realized they need to change it. And we were one of the 5 restaurants that opened there, and I think that was 1982. And in those days, you didn't dare walk on Pennsylvania Avenue after dark. And it's great to see it today. It's one of the really urban happening places.
It's incredible.
So we've been at the beginning of really restoring inner city neighborhoods through creating great places for people to meet.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you also went to Philadelphia. Is that correct?
We were in Philadelphia. We were in Memphis. We were in Minneapolis.
Wow. And each of those, were they the same concept, a mix or a...
So we opened generally with a Pleasant Peasant, which was our table service continental casual. Mm-hmm. And then our extreme casual was mix. Mm-hmm. And that was fresh pastas, burgers. You could choose to have a beef burger or a chicken breast. And we did everything else the same. So you could get the same toppings, and we had a whole line of things. Mm-hmm. And of course, our great desserts, chocolate cream pie and these incredible cheesecakes and just really decadent, fun desserts.
One of the other things I think Midtown is really interesting today, because anybody who is from Atlanta, Midtown is pretty much fully formed, an incredible place to be in the Beltline and Colony Square and all these things. But in the 70s and 80s, it really wasn't. And in fact, when I moved here 20 years ago, it's still, you really didn't quite walk Peachtree Street. But tell me a little bit about, there's the Midtown Alliance, which I know you were very involved with. I know there's a couple stories there that I'd love to hear.
Yes, Midtown was a dear spot. Of course, back in the day, we had restaurants in downtown, Midtown, Buckhead, the perimeter. So we were really involved in the business community of Atlanta on various activities that were happening. But Midtown was that area where there really wasn't a lot happening. And so in mid-70s, I'd already had the restaurant. The Central Atlanta Progress, which was the business group downtown, was very concerned about the condition of Midtown, because all of the executives from the banks and the law firms and the businesses mostly lived in Buckhead and traveled Peachtree to downtown.
Oh,
and
okay.
Midtown was vacant buildings, and it had gotten so bad that there was prostitution so blatantly actually sitting in plate glass windows advertising.
Wow.
And the weeds were everywhere. It's hard to believe. And there are pictures sometimes comparing how you see it, and we all forget how bad it really was. Right. And so Central Atlanta Progress had come to some of the mom and pop businesses. There was an architect and an art gallery, photo folks, and they formed the business association to help clean it up. And Central Atlanta funded that. And so this was wrapping up the fourth year of this, and they had done a good job of cleaning it up. And I was aware of it in funding it, and attended a couple of their meetings. And so Central Atlanta Progress had declared cleanup, and they had told them that, thank you very much. We're done. And so they came to me and said, help. And at this point, I had a business profile within, and they felt that I could help them negotiate. And so they asked me if I would take chairman. Now, I had never even been to any of their executive meetings. I'd come to a few luncheons. But at that point, I had 4 restaurants in Midtown.
Okay.
And so I agreed to take the chairmanship.
Okay.
And I said I would do it for 2 years. And I met with Dan Sweat at Central Atlanta Progress and asked them to fund it 1 more year, and then to support our effort to be a standalone organization. And he did. At that time, AT&T had just completed their headquarters building at 14th and Peachtree.
Okay.
And in fact, I don't think they'd even had the grand opening yet, but I asked them to let us use their boardroom.
Nice.
And I'd gotten several of the really bigger companies, not the mom and pops, but some of the big companies that were headquartered there, Holder Construction and various other businesses. And so we had this very professional looking boardroom with a great new board, and I had 12 board members, and it transitioned this idea of this mom and pop that was meeting around a table at Mary Mac's for their board meetings, and suddenly we were in a boardroom with nameplates, and Pat Gann, who ran the Dogwood Festival, had come on the board, and we did a whole arts festival, and we really positioned Midtown at that point as the center for the arts and the place where people could live. We brought in the neighborhoods of Home Park and Ansley Park and Midtown to be part of the association. The name was later changed to the Alliance because it was more than a business association. It was truly an alliance of everyone in Midtown, both residents, businesses.
Right.
And the leadership that we put in place in that first board in the 2 years remained the leadership for the next couple decades. Susan Mindham had come in to work in the office, and in the second year, I elevated her to executive director. And here was a single mother raising 3 kids, not the person that normally would be seen as that person, but I saw a spirit in Susan that could get things done, and she remained there for the next 25 years until she retired.
Wow.
And so we really moved Midtown. And of course, one of the great things is we brought this spirit in. We brought the neighborhood people in, the business people, and to pull weeds on Peachtree Street.
Wait.
And I mean, it was that bad that we had to pull weeds. And so we did a weekend and we bought a truckload of pansies to put in all the tree beds and so here was all these yellow, blue, and white. And we cleaned it up, and it was a whole neighborhood effort. That was just to clean Peachtree Street. What I did not realize is that IBM was looking at Atlanta as a headquarters, so they had chosen Atlanta to put a headquarters building. And the media was all speculating that there were 3 sites in downtown, 2 sites in Buckhead, and the far distant possibility would be a perimeter site. Midtown wasn't even mentioned as a possibility. That's how Midtown was just not in anyone's thought. It was just this place that was between.
Overlooked.
And IBM chose Midtown, and that was really when financial and real estate people in the business world took Midtown as through different lenses. And later someone told me the story that while it wasn't the deciding factor, that they were so impressed that there was such a spirit in the neighborhood that we had come together to plant all these flowers. And it looked great. It was just this emerging area, but these fresh flowers all on the street. So that timing was key.
Another thing that I think you worked on a bit was the Atlanta Conventions and Visitors Bureau, the ACVB, who's obviously central and instrumental in all hospitality in Atlanta. But tell me a little bit about that, because that's also not early days maybe, but...
Well, absolutely. Early days. And before that, Monica, as I was head of the Georgia Hospitality Association, which we had brought together the Hotel Association, the Restaurant Association, the airlines, and the travel. So we had united all organizations that were involved in hospitality and had created. And then I became chair of that organization. And it was in that period of time that I was chairing that organization that we changed the laws to allow outside dining. Believe it or not, the health department would not allow you to eat on the street.
No way. You couldn't sit on the sidewalks. All these sidewalk cafes.
You couldn't sit on the sidewalk cafes. So
wow.
We brought that about. We brought Sunday liquor.
Still a bit of a battle.
I think it's one of the fun pictures with Governor Zell Miller signing that law.
Okay, and we'll find that. Yeah.
And but you see baby face, and then I headed the Atlanta Convention and Visitors for 2 years, and I became known as a reorganizer because we changed the key staff there and put Spurge Richardson, who also retired as executive director of that organization
years later.
And so it was. It's been fun and rewarding to be a key part of these organizations and to establish leadership that carried it on for several decades, even after I left the leadership positions.
One of the things you touched on just very briefly was Mary Mac's, that you started to do some of your board meetings there. Mary Mac's is a very pivotal place for you. Will you tell us a little bit about Mary Mac's and Margaret Lupo, who you met, and
absolutely.
why that's important?
Well, Mary Mac's, for Atlanta, it's one of the political salons that happened. Margaret Lupo bought the tea shop from Margaret McKinsey, which is why it's Mary Mac's and not Margaret's whatever. So when we were scraping paint off the walls of the Pleasant Peasant, that was our treat to go down a couple of weeks and we ate at Mary Mac's because you could eat all this great wholesome Southern food for very reasonable prices. Of course, the reason Mary Mac's is part of our history is because Margaret's daughter, Marie, was working there, and I just saw her as Margaret's daughter, and then we were snowed in together one night that was 1982.
At Mary Mac's.
We were actually snowed in at Daly's downtown. She had dropped into Daly's with a group of people, and I was checking on our restaurants. And so a romance started there, and we were married a year later. And so that's where Mary Mac's is a key piece. And as our daughters were being raised, they thought everyone owned a restaurant because they either went to grandmother's restaurants or dad's restaurants. We never ate anywhere else, so they just thought that was natural.
That's normal. So now, after years in the restaurant business, you end up with 36 restaurants. They're all over the Southeast. Tell us a little bit about sort of those last couple of years before you were bought out and you retired. What was sort of going through your head? You sort of made it to the top of your vision.
As I was growing the restaurants and then married and 3 children, I was no longer the carefree person that it didn't matter what happened. Suddenly I had responsibilities beyond myself. One of the great things about selling is it gave us some financial resources to do other things. And one was to buy a weekend farm. Right. Which was just a whim at the time, which I told that story, but it was through the sale that gave us the revenue that we were able to do that. And then that was just before we actually went public. And so that was quite a year that was very different than running a group of restaurants. Sure. And then I was running a public company, and I found that wasn't quite as much fun. We made decisions very differently. And so as my time came to do another 5 years, I had serious reservations. And the 3 weekends or the 3 years of coming down to the farm on the weekends was my real value shift of what was important. And that's when I made the decision that I was not going to renew and that I would cash in my remaining shares. Right. I had not converted to stock. Okay. And so I had a nice parachute. And I took that and stepped off the treadmill. And that's when I thought I was fortunate enough to have early retirement, which I did. Right. And so that's what brought us to the farm full time.
I love that story. I think that all of your sort of really visionary marketing ideas, from the flower pot to the divers off the building, come forward into like the Serenbe box and the really thoughtful, even the street lamps of like thinking differently. And I think your whole career really, comes forward, but you probably had no idea when you bought the farm and you were retiring that there was going to be a whole nother placemaking ahead of you. And so I really thank you for sharing the background and the history. I just think it's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy it, especially the ones that had been to the restaurants over the years. So thank you so much, Steve.
Well, thank you. It's been fun going down, remembering some of these things and these times.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. You can subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts. For more details, visit our website, serenbestories.com.